Keanu Reeves walked along a busy street as the golden glow of the setting sun bathed the city. It was the perfect evening to clear his head. The usual chaos of honking cars and buzzing conversations didn't bother him. If anything, he found comfort in the steady rhythm of the city around him. The faint smell of roasted nuts from a street vendor drifted through the air, mingling with the cool breeze. Kenny paused briefly to glance at a shop window filled with antique clocks, each ticking at its own pace. A faint smile played on his lips. Life was rarely this peaceful for him. As he continued walking, a sudden movement in his peripheral vision made him stop. It was quick, a blur of scruffy fur darting between people on the sidewalk. Turning his head, he saw it clearly this time. A small puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, running full speed through the crowded street. The puppy wasn't just running aimlessly. It was chasing something. Kenny's eyes followed the pup's determined path and landed on a cyclist weaving through traffic. The man on the bike was pedaling at a steady pace, his posture relaxed, completely unaware of the tiny pursuer. Kenny tilted his head, intrigued. "What's that little guy up to?" he muttered under his breath. The puppy barked sharply, as if calling out to the cyclist, but the man didn't look back. Instead, he casually adjusted the strap of the satchel slung across his back and kept going. Kenny's curiosity deepened. There was something purposeful about the puppy's chase, something beyond just a playful run. The little dog's small legs moved furiously, its floppy ears bouncing with every step. Kenny watched as it narrowly avoided a delivery cart, slipping under it at the last second. People on the sidewalk barely noticed, too caught up in their own lives to pay attention. But Kenny couldn't look away. As the cyclist turned a corner, the puppy didn't hesitate for a second. It barked again, louder this time, and followed, its determination unshakable. Kenny stood still for a moment, torn between continuing his peaceful walk or getting into the gnawing curiosity that was now impossible to ignore. "All right, little guy," he said with a soft chuckle, adjusting his leather jacket. "Let's see where this goes." Kenny picked up his pace, weaving through the crowd to keep the puppy in sight. As he walked, he thought about how strange the whole situation was. It wasn't every day that you saw a puppy chasing a cyclist with such determination. And why wasn't the cyclist stopping? Most people would at least glance back if a dog barked at them. The chase led Kenny away from the main street and into a quieter part of town. The buildings here were older, their paint faded and signs hanging at odd angles. The air smelled different too, a mix of damp stone and something faintly metallic. Kenny turned the corner just in time to see the cyclist speeding up. The puppy, though visibly tired, refused to slow down. Its tail was stiff, its eyes locked on the satchel swinging on the cyclist's back. Kenny squinted, trying to get a better look. Was the puppy chasing the cyclist because of that bag? He chuckled at the thought. What's so special about that satchel, huh? Despite the humor in his voice, Kenny couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random chase. There was intensity to the puppy's movements, a kind of focus that felt almost human. The street grew quieter, with fewer cars and pedestrians. Kenny's footsteps echoed faintly against the walls of the narrow alley he now found himself in. Up ahead, the cyclist made another sharp turn, and the puppy followed without hesitation. Kenny quickened his stride, unwilling to lose sight of them. The sound of the puppy's barking grew fainter as the distance between them widened. Kenny realized he couldn't keep up on foot, not at this pace. He glanced around, hoping to find something that could help. That's when he spotted it, an electric scooter parked just outside a convenience store. Its owner was nowhere in sight, likely inside grabbing a snack. Kenny hesitated for a split second. He wasn't one to take things without permission, but the situation felt urgent. "I'll bring it back," he promised under his breath, hopping onto the scooter. The scooter whirred to life as he twisted the throttle. It wasn't the most powerful ride, but it was fast enough to catch up to the tiny dog and its target. As he sped down the street, Kenny couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, a Hollywood star on a borrowed scooter, chasing a scruffy little puppy that was chasing a cyclist. It felt like something straight out of an action movie, only this time he wasn't sure of the script. Up ahead, the cyclist came into view again, his movements now more deliberate. Kenny noticed him glance over his shoulder, his face briefly illuminated by a passing streetlight. The man's expression wasn't just annoyed, it was nervous. Kenny's grip on the scooter tightened. His gut told him there was more to this chase than he initially thought. The puppy's persistence, the cyclist's unease, the satchel, everything felt connected, though he couldn't yet piece it all together. The puppy barked again, louder and sharper, as if signaling something to Kenny. He couldn't help but grin. "I hear you, buddy. I'm right behind you." The quiet stroll he'd set out for was long gone, replaced by a growing sense of adventure. Kenny had no idea where this chase would lead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't about to turn back now. Kenny tightened his grip on the electric scooter's handlebars as the chase led him into the heart of a bustling street. The soft hum of the scooter's motor was drowned out by the cacophony of honking cars, vendors shouting about their wares, and the occasional burst of laughter from people enjoying their evening. Ahead, the small puppy zigzagged through the chaos with remarkable agility. Its tiny paws tapped against the pavement as it dodged obstacles that would have stopped most animals in their tracks. A delivery truck rumbled past, its brakes screeching as it narrowly avoided the pup. Unfazed, the little dog barked and continued forward, its focus entirely on the cyclist. Kenny followed close behind, carefully weaving through the traffic. He kept his eyes locked on the puppy, impressed by its determination. "This guy's got some serious grit," he muttered, swerving to avoid a street vendor pushing a cart of roasted peanuts. The cyclist, now clearly aware of his two unexpected pursuers, began pedaling faster. Kenny noticed him glancing over his shoulder more frequently, his expression shifting from mild irritation to outright panic. The man adjusted the satchel on his back, pulling it tighter as if he feared losing it. The bustling streets seemed to close in around them, the noise amplifying the tension of the moment. The cyclist made a sharp turn onto a side road, and the puppy didn't miss a beat, following seamlessly. Kenny grinned as he accelerated the scooter to keep up. "Not bad, little buddy," he said under his breath. The side road was narrower but just as chaotic. A fruit vendor shouted angrily as the cyclist knocked over a crate of oranges, sending them rolling across the path. Kenny swerved expertly to avoid the scattered fruit, but the puppy didn't have the luxury of maneuverability. It leaped over one orange, dodged another, and barely managed to avoid slipping on the juice from a crushed piece. Kenny chuckled in amazement. "You're tougher than you look." The cyclist, clearly frustrated, tried to shake them off by weaving erratically. He cut across lanes, nearly colliding with a scooter, and almost ran into a group of teenagers crossing the street. The commotion caused more people to turn their heads, but the cyclist seemed oblivious to the growing attention. Kenny, on the other hand, noticed the puppy slowing down slightly. Its tongue hung out its mouth as it panted, and its tiny legs were beginning to falter. "Hang in there, buddy," Kenny said aloud, willing the little dog to keep going. Up ahead, the cyclist suddenly veered into an alleyway, disappearing from view. The puppy barked sharply, as if frustrated by the sudden turn, but it followed without hesitation. Kenny turned the scooter sharply, the tires screeching as he entered the dimly lit alley. The alley was a tight, cluttered space lined with overflowing garbage bins and piles of discarded cardboard boxes. A faint smell of dampness lingered in the air. The cyclist pedaled through the narrow path with surprising speed, but the puppy and Kenny were close behind. Kenny maneuvered the scooter carefully, avoiding the uneven ground and debris. The puppy, despite its size, managed to navigate the obstacles with incredible precision. At one point, it jumped onto a low stack of boxes to avoid a puddle, and then hopped down effortlessly to continue the chase. "You're full of surprises," Kenny muttered, impressed once again. The cyclist glanced back, his face briefly illuminated by a flickering streetlight. His eyes widened when he saw Kenny still following. He muttered something under his breath and tried to pedal even faster, but his movements were growing clumsier. Kenny's gaze shifted to the satchel bouncing on the man's back. The bag zipper was partially open, and for a split second, Kenny thought he saw something shiny glinting inside. He squinted, trying to get a better look, but the cyclist adjusted the strap, pulling it closer to his body. "What's in that bag?" Kenny wondered aloud. The puppy barked again, as if echoing his thoughts. Its determination hadn't wavered, even though its pace was beginning to slow. Kenny could tell the little dog was pushing itself to the limit. The alley opened into another street, this one quieter but still alive with the hum of city life. Kenny realized the cyclist was running out of places to hide. The man's desperation was becoming obvious. His erratic movements, his constant glances back, and the way he clung to the satchel all pointed to one thing. He had something to hide. Kenny slowed slightly, letting the puppy lead the way. "You know what you're doing, don't you?" he said, smiling softly. The street ahead was clearer now, with fewer cars and pedestrians. The chase had entered a new phase, and Kenny could feel it. Whatever was in that bag, it was important enough to make the cyclist risk everything. And whatever the puppy knew, it wasn't about to stop until the truth was uncovered. Kenny leaned forward on the scooter, his resolve firm. "All right, let's see how this ends." Chapter 3. Kenny Takes Action. The chase continued into a quieter street, away from the noise of the city. Kenny stayed close on the scooter, following the little puppy and the cyclist ahead. The puppy was still running hard, but Kenny could see it was starting to get tired. Its legs were moving as fast as they could, and it panted heavily, but it didn't stop. The cyclist kept pedaling, glancing back every few seconds. His face looked worried now, and his hands gripped the handlebars tightly. Kenny noticed him adjusting the satchel on his back, pulling it closer to him like he was protecting it. Kenny frowned. "What's in that bag that's so important?" he wondered. The cyclist turned suddenly onto a narrow road filled with broken carts and piles of trash. The puppy slowed for just a moment, then barked loudly and dashed into the alley. Kenny followed, steering the scooter carefully around the debris. The alley was dark, with only a few flickering lights above. It smelled damp and musty, like old garbage left in the rain. Kenny kept his eyes on the cyclist, who was pedaling harder now, almost in a panic. As he sped through the alley, Kenny whistled sharply. The puppy stopped for a second, turning its head to look at him. Its big eyes seemed to ask, "Are you coming?" Kenny smiled. "Don't worry, I'm right here." The puppy barked once, as if understanding, and then started running again. Kenny chuckled. "You're one tough little dog," he said, impressed by its determination. Up ahead, the cyclist swerved around a stack of broken crates, but his movement was clumsy. The satchel on his back bounced wildly, and something small fell out. It hit the ground with a loud clink and rolled to the side of the alley. Kenny braked quickly and picked up the object. It was a small key, shiny and covered in fancy designs. It looked old and important, like it belonged to a safe or a locked chest. Kenny turned the key over in his hand, trying to figure it out. "What does this open?" he thought. The cyclist, now noticing what Kenny had, glanced back. His eyes went wide with fear, and he pedaled even faster. He was clearly desperate to get away. Kenny put the key in his pocket and revved the scooter again, following the puppy. The little dog, even though it was clearly tired, kept chasing the cyclist. It barked louder, its tiny body full of determination. Kenny leaned forward on the scooter, speeding up to catch them. "You're not giving up, are you?" he said, smiling at the puppy. "All right, let's do this together." The chase wasn't just about curiosity anymore. Kenny wanted to know why the cyclist was running and why the puppy was so focused on stopping him. With the key in his pocket and the puppy leading the way, Kenny felt more determined than ever to uncover the truth. He tightened his grip on the handlebars and followed the cyclist around another corner, ready for whatever came next. Kenny sped through the narrow street, staying close behind the cyclist. The little puppy was still running hard, barking sharply as it followed the man on the bike. Kenny couldn't help but admire the dog's persistence. It was small, scruffy, and clearly exhausted, but it didn't slow down. The cyclist, however, was getting more nervous. He kept looking back at Kenny and the puppy, his face pale and tense. Each time he glanced over his shoulder, his grip on the satchel tightened. The bag bounced against his back, the zipper still slightly open, revealing small glimpses of something shiny inside. "What's in that bag?" Kenny wondered, his curiosity growing. Why is he so scared of a puppy? The cyclist swerved sharply to avoid a stack of wooden pallets, nearly losing his balance. The satchel shifted and another small object fell out. It clattered to the ground behind him, but the man didn't stop. He just pedaled harder, his movements growing frantic. Kenny braked his scooter and scooped up the fallen item. It was a small piece of jewelry, a gold chain with a sparkling pendant. Kenny frowned as he turned it over in his hand. "Stolen goods," he muttered. The cyclist had no time to react to Kenny picking up the item. He was too focused on getting away. The puppy, undeterred, kept barking and running after him. Kenny could see its little legs trembling from exhaustion, but it refused to stop. "You're one tough little guy," Kenny said softly, revving the scooter again to catch up. The alley grew darker as they continued, with flickering lights casting long shadows on the walls. The cyclist turned again, entering a busier street filled with small shops and market stalls. He weaved through the crowd, knocking over a crate of apples in his rush. The puppy leaped over the fallen fruit, slipping slightly but quickly regaining its balance. People in the market shouted as the cyclist sped past, and Kenny followed close behind, steering the scooter around the scattered apples. "Sorry," Kenny called to the vendors as he zipped by. The cyclist's panic was now impossible to ignore. His movements were erratic, and he muttered to himself as he pedaled. The satchel on his back swung wildly, nearly slipping off his shoulder. Kenny noticed the man trying to adjust the bag as he rode, his hands shaking. The puppy barked louder, its tiny body nearly vibrating with determination. Kenny grinned. "You're not letting him get away, are you?" Just as they rounded another corner, the cyclist made a mistake. He tried to take a sharp turn too quickly and lost control of the bike. The wheels skidded, and he crashed into a stack of wooden crates. The impact sent the satchel flying, and the man tumbled to the ground. Kenny braked quickly, jumping off the scooter as the puppy darted toward the fallen satchel. The little dog grabbed the bag strap in its teeth and tugged at it fiercely, growling softly. The cyclist scrambled to his feet, reaching for the satchel, but froze when he saw Kenny standing there, the fallen key and gold chain in hand. Kenny raised an eyebrow. "You're not going anywhere," he said calmly. The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Kenny and the puppy. The crowd from the market began to gather, curious about the commotion. The puppy stood protectively over the satchel, barking at anyone who got too close. Kenny stepped forward, picking up the satchel carefully. He opened it just enough to see what was inside: more jewelry, bundles of cash, and a few small documents with strange markings. His suspicions were confirmed. The cyclist was a thief. The man lunged toward Kenny, but the puppy growled and jumped forward, snapping at his heels. The man yelped, stumbling backward. "Looks like your little plan didn't work out," Kenny said, dealing his phone to call the authorities. The puppy wagged its tail briefly, and then sat down beside Kenny, panting heavily but keeping its eyes on the thief. The gathered crowd murmured in excitement as they realized what had happened. By the time the police arrived, the cyclist was sitting on the ground, defeated, while the puppy stood proudly next to Kenny. The officer took the satchel and thanked Kenny for his quick thinking. Kenny glanced down at the puppy, a soft smile on his face. "You're the real hero here," he said, crouching to pat the little dog on the head. The puppy wagged its tail again, its tired eyes shining with pride. Kenny knew this was just the beginning of an unforgettable bond. The street buzzed with excitement as the thief tried to make another escape. He had broken free from the police's first attempt to grab him, jumped back onto his bike, and started pedaling frantically. The crowd, unsure what to do, gasped in surprise. Kenny didn't waste a second. He looked at the little puppy, who barked loudly as if to say, "We're not done yet." Kenny gave a quick nod and hopped back onto the electric scooter. The thieves swerved into a nearby alley, hoping to lose them again. The alley was crowded with vendors and shoppers, making it harder to move quickly. Kenny followed, weaving through the crowd. The puppy ran alongside him, its determination as strong as ever. "Excuse me, coming through," Kenny called out as he maneuvered the scooter. People stepped aside, some pointing at the scene in amazement. The cyclist, realizing he was still being followed, began to panic again. He tried to dodge around a vegetable cart, but Kenny saw his chance. He shouted to the people nearby, "Block him! Don't let him through." The vendor, a quick-thinking old man, pushed his cart forward, cutting off the thief's path. The cyclist swore under his breath and turned sharply, but the sudden change in direction slowed him down. The puppy, as if understanding the plan, sprinted ahead and nipped at the thief's heels. The man yelped and wobbled on his bike, nearly losing his balance. "Good work, buddy," Kenny shouted, smiling at the dog's cleverness. The cyclist pedaled harder, trying to shake them off, but the crowd was now on Kenny's side. People started moving carts and boxes into his way, forcing him to zigzag and slow down even more. Kenny used the chaos to his advantage. He spotted an old construction ramp nearby and steered the scooter toward it. With a determined look, he launched himself off the ramp, landing right in front of the cyclist. The thief skidded to a stop, his face pale with fear. Before he could turn around, the puppy was there, barking and blocking his path. The little dog growled, its tiny body bristling with energy. "Nowhere to go now," Kenny said, stepping off the scooter. The cyclist looked around desperately, but the crowd had closed in. Some of them were holding up their phones, recording the entire scene. He sighed and dropped his bike, raising his hands in surrender. Kenny walked up to the man and picked up the satchel. He opened it again, showing the crowd the stolen jewelry and cash inside. "This," Kenny said, holding the bag up, "is why he's been running." The crowd gasped, and the puppy barked triumphantly. Kenny crouched down to pet the little dog. "You did it," he said with a smile. "You're the real hero here." By the time the police arrived, the thief was sitting on the curb, looking defeated. The puppy stood proudly next to Kenny, wagging its tail as if it knew it had won. "Great work," one officer said, shaking Kenny's hand. He glanced down at the puppy and added, "And you too, little one." As the thief was taken away, the crowd cheered for the puppy and Kenny. The little dog barked happily, soaking in the attention. Kenny, still crouching next to it, felt a strange connection to the scrappy, determined pup. He looked into its big, bright eyes and chuckled. "You're something else, aren't you?" The puppy wagged its tail even harder, leaning into Kenny's hand. For the first time, after all the chaos, it seemed to relax. Kenny knew their adventure wasn't over just yet. The thief had been caught, and the excitement in the air began to settle as the police started asking questions. Kenny stood nearby, holding the satchel while the puppy stayed close to him, its tail wagging slowly but its eyes still watching the thief. One of the officers took the bag from Kenny and carefully looked inside. His eyebrows shot up as he pulled out stacks of cash, shiny pieces of jewelry, and a few folded documents. The officer whistled. "This is quite a haul," he said, showing the contents to his partner. Kenny nodded. "I found a key earlier. Looks like it fell out of the bag during the chase. Might open something important." He handed the key to the officer, who examined it closely. The thief, sitting on the curb with his hands cuffed, avoided everyone's eyes. But when the police officer held up the key, the man stiffened, his face betraying his fear. Kenny noticed the reaction immediately. "Looks like this is important to you," Kenny said, his voice calm but firm. The thief didn't reply. The puppy, however, barked loudly, almost as if to say, "You're not fooling anyone." Kenny chuckled and patted the dog on the head. "You're not letting him off the hook, huh?" A few minutes later, a man hurried toward the scene, out of breath and clearly distressed. "That's my satchel," he shouted, pointing at the bag in the officer's hands. The police officer turned to him. "Can you prove it belongs to you?" The man pulled out his phone and showed pictures of the satchel, along with receipts and some photos of the jewelry inside. It was clear he was telling the truth. "This bag was stolen from my store earlier today," he explained. "I was chasing him when I lost track of them." "Thank you so much for catching him." Kenny glanced at the puppy. "I think you owe most of the thanks to this little guy." The man's face lit up. "Wait, that's my dog. I trained him to guard the shop. He must have seen the thief and followed him." He crouched down and opened his arms. "Come here, Chase." The puppy's ears perked up at the name. It barked excitedly and ran to its owner, tail wagging wildly. The man hugged the dog tightly, laughing. "Good boy, Chase. You're a hero." Kenny smiled, watching the joyful reunion. "So his name's Chase? Fits him perfectly." The officer handed the satchel back to the man. "We'll need a full statement from you about what was stolen and how this happened. But thanks to your dog and this gentleman here, we've got the thief and most of your goods back." The man looked at Kenny gratefully. "Thank you so much for helping. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Kenny shook his head. It was all Chase. He wouldn't give up, so neither could I. Chase wagged his tail even harder, as if he understood the praise. The crowd that had gathered began to cheer for the puppy, clapping and shouting, "Good boy," and "What a brave dog." The thief, meanwhile, was led away by the police, his head hanging low. The stolen goods were safe, and Chase was the hero of the day. As things settled down, Kenny knelt beside Chase and gave him one last pat on the head. "You're something special, Chase," he said warmly. "You've got the heart of a lion in the body of a little pup." Chase barked happily, licking Kenny's hand before returning to his owner's side. For the first time that day, everything felt calm again, but Kenny couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of his story with Chase. The sun was setting, and the once busy street was now quieter. Most of the crowd had dispersed, but a few people stayed behind, still talking about the incredible chase they had witnessed. The police were wrapping up their investigation, and the thief was being taken away in a patrol car. Kenny stood near the shopkeeper and his little dog, Chase. The puppy sat proudly next to his owner, his tail wagging as he soaked in the attention from the people around him. A group of children came up to pet Chase, giggling as the scruffy pup happily licked their hands. "You're quite the celebrity now," Kenny said, crouching down to scratch Chase behind the ears. Chase barked softly, leaning into Kenny's hand. The shopkeeper smiled. "I always knew Chase was smart, but I had no idea he'd do something like this. He's never run off before. I guess he saw the thief stealing the bag and decided to act." Kenny nodded. "He's got good instincts. Most dogs would have given up long before this, but not Chase. He didn't stop until the job was done." The shopkeeper looked at Chase with pride. "He's been with me since he was a little pup. I found him on the street near my shop, and he's been part of the family ever since. I trained him to watch over the shop, but I never thought he'd become a hero." As the shopkeeper spoke, a police officer approached with a small box. Inside was a shiny medal with a ribbon attached. "This is for Chase," the officer said, smiling. "He deserves recognition for his bravery today." The shopkeeper's eyes widened in surprise. "A medal? For Chase?" The officer nodded. "It's not every day a little dog helps caught a thief and recover stolen goods. Chase showed incredible courage and determination. He's a hero." The shopkeeper knelt down and gently placed the medal around Chase's neck. The puppy tilted his head, sniffing the medal curiously before barking happily. The crowd clapped and cheered, and Chase wagged his tail as if he knew exactly what was going on. Kenny chuckled. "Looks like you're officially a big deal now, Chase. Don't let it go to your head." The shopkeeper laughed. "He's going to get a big treat tonight, that's for sure." The police officer turned to Kenny. "And thank you, Mr. Reeves. You played a big role in making this happen. Without your help, things might have ended very differently." Kenny shrugged modestly. "I just followed Chase's lead. He was the real star of the show." As the evening went on, the shopkeeper invited Kenny to the store for a cup of tea. Chase trotted alongside them, his little medal clinking softly with each step. Inside the shop, Kenny sat down with the shopkeeper while Chase lay at their feet, chewing on a well-deserved bone. The shopkeeper couldn't stop talking about how much Chase meant to him and how proud he was of his little dog. Kenny listened with a smile, feeling a deep sense of admiration for the bond between the man and his pup. He glanced down at Chase, who looked up at him with bright, trusting eyes. "You know," Kenny said thoughtfully, "not all heroes wear capes. Some just wear medals and wag their tails." The shopkeeper laughed. "That's true. Chase may be small, but he's got a big heart." As the night grew darker, Kenny said his goodbyes and promised to visit again soon. He gave Chase one last pat on the head before stepping out into the cool evening air. As he walked away, Kenny couldn't help but think about how one little puppy had turned an ordinary day into an unforgettable adventure. And though he didn't know it yet, this wouldn't be the last time he crossed paths with Chase. After the excitement of the day, the street grew quieter. The shopkeeper locked up his store, and Kenny stood nearby, watching Chase as the little dog sniffed around happily, his metal clinking softly with every step. "Chase seems full of energy, even after all that running," Kenny said, smiling. The shopkeeper chuckled. "He's always been like this. No matter how tired he gets, he bounces back quickly. He's got a strong spirit." Kenny crouched down to pet Chase, who wagged his tail and licked Kenny's hand. "You've got yourself a special dog," Kenny said warmly. The shopkeeper nodded. "He's more than just a guard dog. He's family. But I think he's taken a liking to you." Kenny looked at Chase, who was now sitting by his side, his bright eyes looking up at him as if they'd known each other forever. "Is that true, Chasing? Are we friends now?" he asked with a playful grin. Chase barked once, his tail wagging harder. The shopkeeper smiled. "It looks like you've made a strong impression on him. He doesn't warm up to people this quickly." As they talked, Kenny noticed Chase occasionally limping on one of his front paws. He frowned. "Looks like he might have hurt himself during the chase." The shopkeeper's face filled with concern. "Oh no, I didn't notice. Let me take a look." Chase held still as the shopkeeper gently checked his paw. "It's not too bad, but I think we should take him to the vet just to be safe," the shopkeeper said. "I'll come with you," Kenny offered. "After everything Chase has done today, he deserves to be taken care of." The shopkeeper nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. That's very kind of you." They walked together to the nearest vet clinic, with Chase trotting along happily, as if nothing was wrong. When they arrived, the vet greeted them warmly and examined Chase's paw. "It's just a small sprain," the vet said with a reassuring smile. "Nothing serious. He just needs to rest for a couple of days, and he'll be back to normal." The shopkeeper sighed with relief. "Thank you, doctor. I was so worried." Kenny leaned down to pat Chase gently. "You're one tough pup, you know that? You deserve some rest after today." Chase wagged his tail and licked Kenny's hand, making him laugh. As they left the clinic, the shopkeeper turned to Kenny. "Thank you for staying with us. It means a lot." Kenny shrugged modestly. Chase earned it. He's the hero today. When they reached the shop, the shopkeeper invited Kenny inside for another cup of tea. Chase curled up on a soft blanket, his eyes half closed but still keeping an eye on Kenny. As they sat and talked, Kenny couldn't help but feel a connection to the little dog. There was something about Chase's bravery and determination that reminded him of his own journey in life. "You know," Kenny said, looking at Chase, "he's not just a brave dog, he's got a lot of heart." "That's rare." The shopkeeper nodded. "He's changed my life in so many ways, and now it seems like he's made a new friend in you." Kenny smiled. "I think he has." As the night wore on, Kenny said his goodbyes and promised to visit again. He patted Chase on the head one last time. "Rest up, buddy. I'll see you soon." Chase gave a soft bark, his tail wagging lazily as he watched Kenny leave. As Kenny walked back into the cool night, he felt a warmth in his heart. Chase wasn't just any dog, he was something special, and Kenny had a feeling this was just the beginning of their bond. A few days had passed since the wild chase, and life at the shop had returned to normal. Customers came and went. The shopkeeper worked behind the counter, and Chase sat by the door, wagging his tail as people entered. His little medal still hung around his neck, clinking softly when he moved. Kenny had kept his promise to visit. That afternoon, he walked into the shop, greeted by Chase's excited bark. The puppy ran to him immediately, jumping up to lick his hand. "Good to see you too, buddy," Kenny said, laughing as he crouched to pet him. Chase wagged his tail so hard it looked like it might fall off. The shopkeeper smiled warmly. "Chase has been waiting for you. Every time someone walks by the door, he perks up like he's expecting you." "Really?" Kenny asked, scratching Chase behind the ears. "I guess we're friends now, huh?" Chase barked again, his bright eyes full of excitement. Kenny sat down at the counter as the shopkeeper poured him a cup of tea. "You know," Kenny said thoughtfully, "I've been wondering if Chase is his real name." The shopkeeper chuckled. "Actually, it's not. I never officially gave him a name. When I found him as a stray, I just started calling him Buddy or Little Guy. But after what happened the other day, I think Chase fits him perfectly." Kenny nodded, looking at the puppy. "Chase, it suits him. He's got the heart of a runner, never giving up no matter how tough things get." The shopkeeper smiled. It's like he named himself with how he acts. Kenny turned to Chase. What do you think, buddy? Do you like the name Chase? The puppy tilted his head as if thinking about it, then barked loudly and wagged his tail even harder. I think that's a yes, Kenny said with a laugh. The shopkeeper laughed too. Well, it's settled. From now on his name is Chase. As they talked, a few regular customers came into the shop, greeting Chase with pats on the head. How's the hero doing? One of them asked, smiling. He's doing great, the shopkeeper replied proudly. And now he's got an official name, Chase. The customer laughed. Chase the hero. It's perfect. Chase barked happily, basking in the attention. Kenny watched the little dog and smiled. There was something special about Chase, something that made everyone around him feel happy and safe. He was more than just a dog, he was a symbol of courage and loyalty. As the day went on, Kenny stayed at the shop, talking with the shopkeeper and playing with Chase. He felt a growing bond with the scrappy little puppy, and it warmed his heart. When it was time to leave, Kenny crouched down to say goodbye. Take care, Chase, he said, ruffling the puppy's fur. You're a good boy. Chase barked softly, leaning into Kenny's hand as if he didn't want him to go. Kenny smiled. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. As Kenny walked out of the shop and into the busy street, he couldn't help but think about how much Chase had already changed his life. The little dog had a way of bringing people together, of showing them what loyalty and bravery really meant. And now, with his new name, Chase was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. A few days had passed since the wild chase, and life at the shop had returned to normal. Customers came and went. The shopkeeper worked behind the counter, and Chase sat by the door, wagging his tail as people entered. His little medal still hung around his neck, clinking softly when he moved. Kenny had kept his promise to visit. That afternoon, he walked into the shop, greeted by Chase's excited bark. The puppy ran to him immediately, jumping up to lick his hand. Good to see you too, buddy, Kenny said, laughing as he crouched to pet him. Chase wagged his tail so hard it looked like it might fall off. The shopkeeper smiled warmly. Chase has been waiting for you. Every time someone walks by the door, he perks up like he's expecting you. Really? Kenny asked, scratching Chase behind the ears. I guess we're friends now, huh? Chase barked again, his bright eyes full of excitement. Kenny sat down at the counter as the shopkeeper poured him a cup of tea. You know, Kenny said thoughtfully, I've been wondering if Chase is his real name. The shopkeeper chuckled. Actually, it's not. I never officially gave him a name. When I found him as a stray, I just started calling him Buddy or Little Guy. But after what happened the other day, I think Chase fits him perfectly. Kenny nodded, looking at the puppy. Chase, it suits him. He's got the heart of a runner, never giving up no matter how tough things get. The shopkeeper smiled. It's like he named himself with how he acts. Kenny turned to Chase. What do you think, buddy? Do you like the name Chase? The puppy tilted his head as if thinking about it, then barked loudly and wagged his tail even harder. I think that's a yes, Kenny said with a laugh. The shopkeeper laughed too. Well, it's settled. From now on his name is Chase. As they talked, a few regular customers came into the shop, greeting Chase with pats on the head. How's the hero doing? One of them asked, smiling. He's doing great, the shopkeeper replied proudly. And now he's got an official name, Chase. The customer laughed. Chase the hero. It's perfect. Chase barked happily, basking in the attention. Kenny watched the little dog and smiled. There was something special about Chase, something that made everyone around him feel happy and safe. He was more than just a dog, he was a symbol of courage and loyalty. As the day went on, Kenny stayed at the shop, talking with the shopkeeper and playing with Chase. He felt a growing bond with the scrappy little puppy, and it warmed his heart. When it was time to leave, Kenny crouched down to say goodbye. Take care, Chase, he said, ruffling the puppy's fur. You're a good boy. Chase barked softly, leaning into Kenny's hand as if he didn't want him to go. Kenny smiled. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. As Kenny walked out of the shop and into the busy street, he couldn't help but think about how much Chase had already changed his life. The little dog had a way of bringing people together, of showing them what loyalty and bravery really meant. And now, with his new name, Chase was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. Kenny stood in the middle of his backyard, looking at Chase, the dog who had been by his side through some strange events. He had always been fond of animals, but there was something special about Chase. The puppy had shown incredible instincts, finding things and leading Kenny to clues no one else could see. It was clear to Kenny that this dog wasn't ordinary. He smiled as Chase sat in front of him, waiting for Kenny's next move. The dog's eyes were bright, full of energy and curiosity, and Kenny felt something click inside him. He had worked with animals before, but nothing like this. Chase had a natural ability to understand what was needed, and Kenny felt he could help the dog reach his full potential. "All right, buddy," Kenny said, kneeling down. "Let's see what we can do together." Kenny started with the basics, simple commands like sit and stay. To his surprise, Chase caught on quickly. The dog seemed to pick up on each command faster than Kenny expected. Each time Kenny said sit, Chase immediately obeyed, his tail wagging in approval. Kenny's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You're a fast learner, aren't you?" he said with a grin. With each repetition, Chase got better. Kenny could see that Chase had a natural instinct to follow his lead. The dog seemed eager to please, and the bond between them grew stronger with every command. Kenny knew that with a little time, Chase could do more than just basic tricks. "Let's take this up a notch," Kenny decided, thinking back to his Action Star training. He wasn't just going to teach Chase the usual commands. He was going to train him to be more than just a pet. He was going to be a partner. Kenny stood up and walked to the other side of the yard, calling to Chase. "Come on, boy. Follow me." Chase immediately ran toward him, using his agility to leap over obstacles like a natural. Kenny watched with a mix of admiration and excitement. This dog had the energy and skills to go far. "Good boy, Chase," Kenny said as the dog made the jump. "You're fast and smart." The more Kenny trained, the more he realized just how capable Chase was. He set up obstacles, made Chase run through tunnels, and even tested him with more complex commands like fetch and wait. With each new challenge, Chase's agility and cleverness shone through. He could jump higher, run faster, and respond quicker than Kenny had ever expected. It was clear that Chase was no ordinary dog, he was something special. Kenny spent hours working with him, pushing him to do more and more. He used his experience in the action world to teach Chase some of the more advanced skills, things like dodging, weaving between obstacles, and even learning how to react quickly in tense situations. It wasn't long before Kenny realized that Chase had an uncanny ability to adapt and learn, even in unpredictable circumstances. Chase's agility was off the charts. He could scale fences with ease, slide under low spaces, and make sharp turns without breaking stride. He wasn't just following commands, he was anticipating what Kenny wanted, reading the environment with an almost human-like intelligence. By the end of the day, Kenny was exhausted, but he couldn't stop smiling. He had trained many animals in his time, but this was different. Chase had quickly become more than just a pet. He was a partner, a dog with a unique skill set that matched Kenny's own abilities. "You're something else, aren't you?" Kenny said, giving Chase a well-deserved pat on the head. The dog looked up at him, tail wagging proudly, as if agreeing. Kenny stood up, his mind already racing with possibilities. With more training, Chase could be an unstoppable force, and together they were going to take on whatever came next. "You and me, Chase," Kenny said with a grin, "we're just getting started." And with that, he knew their bond was only going to grow stronger. As they headed inside for the night, Kenny felt more confident than ever about what they could achieve together. Chase wasn't just a dog, he was a true partner in every sense of the word. A few weeks had passed since Chase's heroic chase and rise to fame. Life at the shop had settled back into a routine, though visitors still came by now and then to meet the hero dog. Chase was happy, his days filled with treats, belly rubs, and his favorite pastime, guarding the shop. Kenny had kept visiting regularly, growing closer to Chase and the shopkeeper. They had become an unlikely trio, sharing laughs, cups of tea, and stories about their lives. Chase, of course, was always at the center of attention, enjoying every moment. One afternoon, while Kenny was at the shop helping restock shelves, the familiar jingle of the shop's doorbell rang. Kenny glanced up, expecting to see a regular customer. Instead, his eyes narrowed as a man walked in, someone he recognized immediately. It was the cyclist. The man looked different now. He wasn't wearing his old ragged clothes, and his nervous expression was replaced with something sharper, more cautious. Kenny's muscles tensed, and Chase, who had been lounging near the counter, perked up. His ears shot forward, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. The shopkeeper looked confused. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but guarded. The man's eyes darted around the shop, landing briefly on Kenny before focusing on Chase. "I'm just browsing," he said, his voice calm but cold. Kenny stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between the man and Chase. "Funny seeing you here," he said, his voice steady but firm. The man froze for a moment, and then smirked. "I'm just here to look around. No harm in that, right?" Chase growled again, his fur bristling as he stepped closer to Kenny. The shopkeeper now realized who the man was and stiffened. "You shouldn't be here," the shopkeeper said, his voice shaking slightly. The man shrugged. "I'm not doing anything wrong, just looking." Kenny didn't buy it. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. The man wasn't here to shop, he was here for something else. Kenny kept his eyes on him, ready for anything. The man took a step closer to the counter, and Chase barked sharply, stepping in front of the shopkeeper. The man flinched at the sound, his smirk fading. "Chase doesn't like you," Kenny said calmly, "and neither do I. You should leave." The man hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door, then back to the satchel behind the counter. The same satchel he had stolen weeks ago. Kenny noticed the glance and stepped closer. "If you're thinking about trying something, don't. Chase is faster than you remember." Chase barked again, louder this time, and the man took a step back. He glared at Kenny, then at the shopkeeper. "This isn't over," he muttered before turning and walking out. The moment the door closed behind him, Kenny turned to the shopkeeper. "Are you okay?" The shopkeeper nodded, though his hands were shaking. "I didn't think he'd come back. Why would he risk it?" Kenny frowned, glancing down at Chase, who was still growling softly at the door. "He probably wants the rest of what he lost, the bag, the key, or whatever else he thinks he can get." The shopkeeper sighed. "We'll have to be extra careful from now on." Kenny crouched down and patted Chase. "Good job, buddy. You knew right away he didn't belong here." Chase wagged his tail slightly, his eyes still fixed on the door. That evening, after the shop was locked up and the streets were quiet, Kenny sat with the shopkeeper and Chase, discussing what to do next. "I'll help keep an eye on things," Kenny said, "and Chase is here too. Between the two of us, that guy won't stand a chance." The shopkeeper smiled weakly. "Thank you, Kenny. I don't know what I'd do without you and Chase." Kenny smiled back, scratching Chase behind the ears. "We're a team now. We got this." Chase barked softly, leaning into Kenny's hand. Together, they would make sure the shop, and everything in it, stayed safe. After the unexpected visit from the thief, life at the shop felt tense for a few days. The shopkeeper double-checked the locks every night, and Chase stayed alert, always watching the door. Kenny made it a point to visit often, making sure everything was calm and that the shopkeeper and Chase felt safe. But something unexpected happened that brought some light back into their lives. News of Chase's bravery had reached even more people, and now he wasn't just a local hero, he was becoming famous. Offers started pouring in, from TV shows to advertisements, all wanting Chase to be part of their stories. One sunny afternoon, a reporter and a camera crew showed up at the shop. They wanted to do a full feature on Chase and his role in stopping the thief. The shopkeeper looked surprised but excited, while Chase wagged his tail as if he knew he was the center of attention. "Chase the hero dog," the reporter said with a bright smile, "has become an inspiration to so many. People love his story of bravery and determination. We'd like to share that story with the world." The shopkeeper smiled nervously. "Well, Chase is just being Chase. He's always been a good dog." Kenny chuckled. "A little humble, aren't we?" he said, crouching to scratch Chase's ears. The reporter set up the cameras and started interviewing the shopkeeper. He shared the story of how he found Chase as a stray, how he trained him to watch over the shop, and, of course, how Chase didn't back down from chasing the thief that day. Then they turned to Kenny. "You were part of the chase too, Mr. Reeves," the reporter said. "What was it like being in such a wild situation?" Kenny shrugged modestly. "Honestly, I just followed Chase's lead. He knew something was wrong, and he didn't give up. I couldn't let him face it alone. Chase is the real star here." Chase barked happily, almost as if he understood. The camera zoomed in on him as he sat proudly with his medal shining in the sunlight. The feature aired on TV a few days later, and Chase's fame exploded. People started visiting the shop just to meet him. Some brought toys and treats, while others took photos and posted them online with captions like, "Met Chase the hero dog today." Chase, being his usual friendly self, loved the attention. He greeted everyone with wagging tails and playful barks, enjoying all the pats and treats he received. The shopkeeper, however, was careful to keep Chase's routine normal. "He's still a dog after all," he told Kenny one day. "I don't want all this fame to change him." Kenny smiled. "I don't think anything could change Chase. He's got his paws firmly on the ground." One day, a representative from an animal charity visited the shop. She had heard about Chase's story and wanted him to be the face of their campaign to promote adoption for stray dogs. "Chase's story is so inspiring," she explained. "It shows people how amazing stray dogs can be. We'd love for Chase to help us encourage others to adopt." The shopkeeper hesitated. "I'm not sure. He's just a small dog. Isn't this too much for him?" Kenny stepped in. "It's a good cause, and I think Chase can handle it. He's already shown how strong and brave he is. Plus, it's a chance to help other dogs like him find homes." The shopkeeper looked at Chase, who tilted his head as if waiting for his say in the matter. "What do you think, Chase?" the shopkeeper asked with a smile. Chase barked excitedly, his tail wagging like crazy. The decision was made. Chase's campaign became a huge success. Pictures of him with his medal and his bright eyes appeared on posters and social media, encouraging people to adopt stray dogs. Shelters reported an increase in adoptions, and people started sharing stories of their own adopted pets. Through it all, Chase stayed the same, playful, loyal, and always ready to protect the people he cared about. Kenny, the shopkeeper, and Chase had become a team, working together to spread a message of hope and bravery. And as Chase basked in the love and attention of his fans, Kenny couldn't help but smile. "You've come a long way, buddy," he said one evening as Chase curled up next to him. But even with all the fame, Chase's favorite place was still by the shopkeeper's side, guarding the shop he called home. Chase's fame continued to grow, but life at the shop stayed mostly the same. The shopkeeper still worked behind the counter, customers came and went, and Chase remained a loyal guardian, always ready to greet everyone with a wagging tail. One quiet afternoon, Kenny stopped by the shop with an idea. "I've been thinking," he said to the shopkeeper as he scratched Chase's ears. "Chase has inspired so many people already. What if we take it a step further?" The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Kenny smiled. "Chase has a gift, his instincts, his bravery, and his connection with people. We could use those qualities to do more good. What if Chase helped with local community programs, like finding lost pets, or even supporting the police in small ways?" The shopkeeper hesitated. "You really think Chase could handle that? He's just a little dog." Kenny crouched down to look Chase in the eyes. "He may be small, but we've both seen what he's capable of. He doesn't back down when it matters." The shopkeeper looked at Chase, who tilted his head curiously, his tail wagging gently. "All right," he said finally, "but we'll take it slow. I don't want to overwhelm him." Kenny nodded. "Of course. Let's start with something simple." Their first task was helping find a lost cat in the neighborhood. A woman had come into the shop, worried about her missing pet. She had heard about Chase and wondered if he could help. Kenny smiled. "Chase is up for the job, aren't you, buddy?" Chase barked eagerly, his tail wagging furiously. The three of them set off together, Kenny, the shopkeeper, and Chase, searching the nearby streets. Chase sniffed the ground and wagged his tail as he picked up scents, his nose working like a tiny radar. After some searching, Chase stopped suddenly, his ears perking up. He barked and ran toward a small alley. Kenny and the shopkeeper followed him and found the missing cat curled up on a pile of boxes. The woman was overjoyed when they brought the cat back to her. "Thank you so much. Chase is amazing," she said, giving him a treat as a reward. Word spread quickly about Chase's new role as the neighborhood's helper. Soon he was helping with all sorts of small tasks, tracking down missing pets, comforting scared children, and even working with local police on community safety programs. One day, the police invited Chase and the shopkeeper to an event about public safety. Kenny came along too, proud to support his furry friend. At the event, Chase was introduced to the crowd as Chase the hero dog. People cheered as he trotted onto the stage, his medal shining in the sunlight. The officer in charge gave a short speech. "Chase may be small, but he's a reminder that courage and kindness can come from anyone. He's inspired our community and shown us the value of never giving up." Kenny clapped loudly, grinning as Chase wagged his tail and barked happily at the crowd. Over time, Chase became a symbol of hope and determination in the community. More people began adopting stray animals, inspired by Chase's story. Local shelters saw an increase in support, with people donating food, supplies, and money to help animals in need. Through it all, Chase stayed the same cheerful, loyal pup he had always been. He loved the attention but was happiest when he was back at the shop, lying by the door and keeping watch. Kenny often sat with him in the evenings, scratching his ears and talking to him. "You've done a lot of good, Chase," he said one night, "but the best part is you brought people together. That's something special." Chase barked softly, leaning into Kenny's hand. The shopkeeper smiled as he watched them. "Chase has given us all a new purpose," he said, "and it's all thanks to you for following him that day." Kenny shook his head. "It's thanks to him. I just followed his lead." As the stars twinkled in the night sky, Kenny, the shopkeeper, and Chase sat quietly, enjoying the peace. They knew there would be more adventures ahead, but for now, they were content, knowing they had made a difference together. Time passed, but the story of Chase, the brave little dog, continued to inspire people. The shop was busier than ever, with customers coming from all over just to meet the hero dog. Children loved playing with him, and adults admired his courage and loyalty. Chase had become more than just a local celebrity. He was a symbol of hope. Kenny still visited the shop regularly, always greeted by Chase's wagging tail and excited barks. The bond between the two had grown strong, and Kenny felt like Chase was as much his friend as the shopkeeper's. One afternoon, as they sat together outside the shop, Kenny looked at the shopkeeper and said, "You know, Chase has done more than just stop a thief. He's brought people together. He's made everyone believe in small acts of bravery." The shopkeeper smiled. "He really has. People talk about him all the time, And it's not just here, his story has reached far beyond this little shop. Chase, lying comfortably at their feet, tilted his head as if listening to their conversation. His metal gleamed in the sunlight, a constant reminder of the day he became a hero. The community had changed too. More people started adopting stray dogs inspired by Chase's journey. Shelters that once struggled were now receiving support from donations and volunteers. It was clear that Chase's story had made a real difference. One day, the shopkeeper received a letter from the local animal shelter. They wanted to honor Chase by naming a new program after him, the Chase Initiative, which would help train rescue dogs and find homes for strays. When the shopkeeper read the letter aloud, Kenny grinned. "That's perfect," he said. "Chase's legacy is already growing." The shopkeeper nodded, looking at Chase. "He deserves it. He's shown the world what a little determination and a lot of heart can do." Chase barked softly, his tail wagging as if he understood every word. As the weeks went by, Kenny, the shopkeeper, and Chase continued their work in the community. They helped the shelter, attended events, and encouraged others to adopt stray animals. Through it all, Chase remained the same cheerful and loyal pup, happy to be with the people he loved. One evening, as the sun set and the shop closed for the day, Kenny sat on the steps with Chase beside him. The street was quiet, and a soft breeze rustled the trees. "You've done a lot, Chase," Kenny said, his voice warm. "More than most people could ever hope to do. You're a true hero." Chase leaned against Kenny, his tail wagging gently. The shopkeeper joined them, sitting on the other side of Chase. Together, they watched the sky turn shades of pink and orange. "I never imagined this little pup I found on the street would change so many lives," the shopkeeper said, smiling. Kenny nodded. "Sometimes the smallest things have the biggest impact." As the stars appeared in the night sky, Chase let out a contented sigh and rested his head on Kenny's knee. The three of them sat there, enjoying the peace of the moment, knowing they had shared something truly special. Chase's story had started with a simple act of bravery, but it had grown into a legacy of hope and kindness. And though the adventure had come to an end, Kenny, the shopkeeper, and Chase all knew that the memories they had made would last a lifetime.